My goals with this short film are to identify how Islamophobia is presented in the news and to start discussions about why it is important to reject such practices. Throughout my investigation, I singled out 4 major ways Muslims are scapegoated in the news. Number 1, Islam is a religion of hate.
I think Islam hates us. There's something there that there's a tremendous hatred there. There's a tremendous hatred. We have to get to the bottom of it. There is an unbelievable hatred of us.
In Islam itself?
You're going to have to figure that out.
To simply stop and say Islam is just about peace and there is nothing more to explore, that is just ridiculous, and that should be self-evident after all of these years. We need to have an honest conversation about the sickness in some parts of the Islamic community.
It's difficult to accept. It's not a pleasant reality that Islam it has a violent streak. It's much easier to sugarcoat it and say, hey, Islam is a religion of peace. We can reason with these people. No. I sat down with Anjem Chowdhury for over an hour there in London, Pat, and I'll tell you, you can't reason with him. He's not going to budge from this belief, and that belief is jihad.
The problem is not guns and it's not knives. The problem is the ideology. And there are no lone wolves in the global jihad. They're all soldiers. And what is the internet but a means of communication? The problem is the jihadic doctrine. He was yelling Allahu Akbar. That was Muhammad's jihadist war cry. His last name...
By the way, if you were watching CNN, it was a little different. He was witness. Suspect was yelling, God is great, in Arabic. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Number 2. There is no distinction between Islamic extremists and the overwhelming majority of peace-loving Muslims.
The question is there a war between the West and radical Islam, or is there a war between the West and Islam itself?
It's radical, but it's very hard to define. It's very hard to separate because you don't know who's who.
And there's really 2 tracks to this global jihadist threat we're facing. Number 1, you obviously have the ISIS threat, the violent jihadists. We know what they want. Then you have kind of the subtle, stealthy jihad where they're getting jobs in the media, the government, academia. They're starting Sharia courts. They wear suits and ties, very reasonable fellows, they seem like. But they are just as dangerous, in my view, Pat, because at the end of the day, the tactics may differ between, say, ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood, but at the end of the day, the end game is the same. That caliphate and Sharia law for one and all, whether we like it or not.
Well, ISIS is no more Islamic than the Westboro Baptist Church is, or the Crusaders are, or Anders Breivik is, or anybody who commits violence in the name of faith. Unfortunately, every single faith has had crazy extremists distort and twist that faith to justify their crazy political ends. And the reality is, Megan, is that moderate Muslims, Christians, and Jews have a lot more in common with each other than they do with extremists from within their own faith. And actually, extremist Muslims and extremist anti-Muslims have a lot in common, and that is that they both distort the Islamic faith to promote their twisted agenda, which is rejected by the 1.7 billion Muslims of the world.
Number 3. The majority of Muslims are not doing enough to condemn the acts of Islamic terrorism.
We see this group ISIS, convert or die. Why do I sense there's not enough outspoken Muslims saying, we condemn this. This is not our religion. Stop doing acts of terror in the name of our religion. I don't hear those voices that loudly.
I get that decent Muslim Americans feel under attack. They feel like they're being unfairly portrayed as terrorists. I understand all that. But at some point, you have to say, this really is a real problem, and it's discrediting all of us. And until we take it seriously, it's going to continue, no?
I think the community has been taking it seriously. I think that research actually shows that the community is very much involved in self-policing. They are very much involved in, cooperating with law enforcement officials and providing tips to them. In fact, the research shows that the majority of tips, that law enforcement officials receive about terrorist plots come from Muslim Americans.
Okay.
These people are extremists who have perverted a faith.
The world will not unite against them, will they?
There are over 1.6 billion Muslims in this world who on a daily basis do great work. 7 out of the last 11 Nobel Peace Prize winners were Muslims, Bill. So what we have to do is come together with Muslim countries, with Muslim majority countries, and our society as Americans,
here's what we have to do,
and push
Mr.
back against this extremist ideology.
Number 4. Redefining the term terrorist to mean Muslim.
She has had to constantly defend her new religion.
My father asked me right after I converted, you know, why do you want to be associated with these terrorists? And I'm like, this is what you see? Oh no. And we kind of have to deal with the backlash of those who have chosen to do something so horrible.
Muslim immigration means more Islamic terrorism. It's just that simple. President Trump has tried to impose national security restrictions, and again, the leftist Islamic Alliance has opposed it.
First, I think we need to take a step back and understand that there's actually a greater threat of terrorism from white supremacist groups and right-wing extremists than there are from individuals who self-identify as Muslim.
Well, that's just not true.
It actually...
No, it's not. There haven't been 100 Americans killed in the last 8 years, 350 wounded from right-wing extremists in the United States. That's not true. And if you claim it is, I'd ask you to cite your source.
The FBI. So according to the FBI. The FBI data indicates that there have been more acts of terrorism committed by right-wing extremists and white supremacists. In addition to that, last year, Duke University...
In the last 8 years, there have been 100 or more than 100 people killed by white supremacists and more than 350 wounded by white supremacists in America. That's not true.
63% of mass shootings in America are committed by white men. But we shouldn't indict white culture for that. What I'm saying is let's do away with the word terrorism altogether.
It's not, and I agree with you that terrorism is a loaded term. And I'd be happy to get rid of it.
It's an ethnic slur. It's become nothing more than a racial slur.
But hold on, that's silly.
By the media, when someone is not a white Christian, right, immediately they are ascribed a motivation simply because of their background, whether it be race or religion or whatever. They are ascribed a motive, and that's not true. When you're white, you're able to have the privilege of acting individually, just on your behalf.
After identifying what strategies are used to instill the fear of Muslims, it is crucial that we consume the news on television and other media platforms without scapegoating Muslims and other groups of people. As a society, we sometimes tend to point fingers in order to blame others for our problems. However, we can learn from certain periods of history that scapegoating can have detrimental consequences. Only through open-mindedness and love can we learn to understand one another. Thank you.